we've done for the past month. So I'm Lucy and I'm part of the Northwest Web and Digital team. So I'll be introducing the session today and also showing you a little bit of some of the highlights really of the work we've done in the past month. Just to give a bit of an introduction to those who've not joined us before, if you have been to any of our show and tells in the past, and also way back in phase one of the work, you'll know that between October and March, we'd been focusing quite heavily on creating our 2 MVP sites for the 1st of April. So in preparation of the unitary authorities beginning on the 1st of April. So essentially the websites or the MVPs were 2 umbrella sites for North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. And then the content on those websites was minimal. There were a couple of service areas where their content and transactions were brought onto the website for safe and legal purposes, but with the majority of the services, they were remaining on the sovereign district, borough and county websites from the 1st of April. And the go live of the umbrella sites or those MVP sites went very well. And now we've obviously moved into the phase 2 of the project, which is focusing on how we'll move the majority of the content left on those sovereign sites over to the new unitary sites, but looking to obviously move and improve that, not just kind of migrating it over. We want to really focus on making sure that the journey through the website is as good as it can be. And then we're obviously looking to hopefully close all of the sovereign websites in March 2023. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about, what we did and how we did it in phase 1, please visit our YouTube channel. The Future Northants channel does have the previous show and tell videos on there, so hopefully somebody will provide the link to that in the chat, but if not, I can provide it a bit later on. So just to give a bit of detail about what these sessions kind of offer to you. So it kind of shows the progress or what we've been doing quite early and often. It allows us to obviously gain feedback from everybody, not just the people that are working on the project day to day, but also yourselves. It's quite valuable for us to obviously get to know your side of the story or some sort of ideas you have. And then it also allows us to show some of the next steps, what we have planned in the future, and also how you can get involved in some of that work. It quite possibly could be testing. We're always looking for users to help test with certain things. So please feel free to raise your hand throughout the session and use the chat at any point to ask any questions or provide feedback or ideas. And also, as mentioned before, if you could just remain on mute until you're obviously addressed, just so that we kind of avoid any background noise. So just to kind of introduce what we're covering today, I'll show you some of the May achievements or the May highlights that we've had. We'll also be talking a little bit about the content migration learnings, or what we plan to do to get the content from the sovereign sites over to the new websites. We'll also be showing you some learnings from our human-centered design work. So this is working as the Lean team. It's like a 4-week experiment. So we'll show you some learnings from that. The development lean team learnings as well. There'll also be an audience activity following those, and then we'll kind of show you what's next. And then we'll obviously open the floor up for any questions that you may have for us after showing you all of that. So I'll give you a bit of an introduction. I'll start off with the May achievements. So as you can see from the slide, there are quite a few things on there. We've been very busy in the past month, so I'll just pick out a couple of key highlights. So as you can see, one of the bullets there is that we've wrapped up phase 1 with a report kind of detailing some of the lessons we've learned and some of the opportunities that have arisen. So that one's quite an interesting one for me. In phase 1, my main role was working on getting online forms prepared for the 1st of April. So whether that's building new ones or updating existing ones, and kind of since the 1st of April I've had about 2 months to review those lessons learned and kind of recap and add to those. We've also had our Sure Trust accessibility reports. They've been received. So the Sure Trust is an external company, so they provide an accessibility report, on the websites. It's quite comprehensive. They run tests through the websites, but also documents that may have been added to the site, and also any sort of online transactions, online forms on there. So it's quite a comprehensive document, and now we're in the stage of reviewing that, seeing what things we need to fix, basically. We've also had some lunch and learn sessions, and we also have some coming up, but just to mention some of the ones we've already had. So we've had a service design session. I attended that one and it was extremely interesting, obviously looking at almost like an introduction to service design and some best practice to go about that. And then one this morning, which was a content design session. So yeah, they're just some of the lunch and learns, and we'll obviously detail some more coming up. And then we've also as mentioned earlier, the 4-week human-centered design experiment. So we kicked off the lean team working, and later on in the presentation there'll be a bit more detail on that. So now I'm going to pass over to David to talk a little bit about the content timeline.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Very good. Okay, content timeline. If we have a look, yeah. So I thought I'd start off just with a recap of one of the slides from last time, looking at the content analysis work that was done. So this was business analysts Mike and Steve, who done a huge amount of work to collect contact details for services, identified times of year when content can or can't be moved to the new sites, and auditing all the content that's out there, documents, forms, because that was one of our key learning points from prior to vesting day, was really being aware of the full scope of the content that we were working with. Because I've worked on 2 or 3 content migrations, like large scale content migrations from platform to platform on the old county websites, and the scale of this compared to those is really enormous, because not only are we taking content from different sovereign, borough and district websites, but it's the knowledge, the ingrained knowledge about each of those services that we're having to kind of skill up across the new sort of county-wide team about the detail of those services. So yeah, talking about the scale, if we go to the next slide, there's this gives you a rough idea of what we're talking about. So this is the zoomed out, so I'm not expecting you to be able to read any of this, but this is the scale of the content timeline in terms of moving and improving these services. So each line on this spreadsheet is a service or a section, and this spans the next 18 months as we move each of these services over to the new websites. So we started speaking to services about their place in the timeline, because obviously depending on what's happening with the actual service move to Unitary, regardless of the website, it is kind of important that we don't try and move the content at a time that doesn't suit those services. So we've booked in initial meetings with the first services on the timeline, and we're sort of going through the process now of speaking to all the others. There's a huge amount of people to deal with, and it's been a bit of an eye-opener, but that it gives you an idea of the scale of it. And then if on the next slide there's a bit of a zoomed in, so this is the top left of it, to give you an idea of the first services that we're starting to kind of move over. And the idea here would be that we work with 2 or 3 sections, quite a few services there, some of the smaller ones, where we've already got a bit of content on. So for elections, just to pick one of those out, a lot of the content is on the new site already, and it's a case of working through the process that we've devised, making sure it's okay with getting the rest of the content over, and closing down the sovereign sites. And then we use the learning from that process to then inform the sort of slightly bigger migrations. So yeah, spoken to these sort of contexts in each of the services listed about their start times, just to give you a bit of an idea, because I know there's a bit of like what looks like jargon there. The scale is like a low, medium and high, and then Z we've just put for where it might just be a 1-pager that only takes a week to sort of work through. And then the DCTR that you can see there, those are the 4 phases. So I'll go through those with you with I think it's the next slide potentially. Yeah, so this is the overall process. So a discovery phase, content design, testing, and review. So I would say largely because of the scale of the work and the timescales that we were working to prior to vesting day, we only really had time for the design phase. It was really just getting the content, working out the best way to display it in the time that we had, and then publishing it on the site. And then the kind of testing phase wasn't as comprehensive as we'd have liked. So now that we've got a bit more time for the rest of the sections, it's about putting in a more detailed process that follows best practice on sort of the GDS approach. So the discovery phase, working across content design with the services and also user research and business analysis to make sure that we know exactly the kind of content that we're dealing with, the user needs for the service, and yeah, having that kind of documentation, I guess, before we start work on the content design. And then, yeah, through to the content design phase. So that's something that we're kind of fairly familiar with from prior to vesting day, but we'll have more to support us when we get started on that, more knowledge and more insight. And then after that, the testing phase. So that's where the site sections will be published at that stage, and then the user research will take place on it, where we get customer feedback on how it's gone and whether the site works for people. So we're not just publishing and moving on to the next one, but there's a detailed test and review, and to make sure that we're kind of backing up what we've created with real insight. So if we go on to the next one. Yeah, so in terms of services, I know we've got a few people on the call from sort of externally, but my main focus is speaking to services now about what the process is to expect. So in terms of the key meetings that we'll be speaking to you about when it comes to your part of the timeline, the first meeting will be an introduction, basically explaining the approach in a bit more detail, setting expectations about how much time you'll need to commit to it, and what we all need to know by the sort of different deadlines that you'll have. And then when it comes to your sort of kickoff time, we'll have a meeting then to agree the scope. So that looks through all the tasks and transactions, sort of forms, payments, documents, related pages and sites, and anything that you can do before that to put that information together is great. We'll be doing obviously that discovery in that phase anyway, and it's the sort of key things for us, I guess, the things that always cause issues are document accessibility. So we're trying to keep documents to a minimum on the new site, but anything that you know is a sort of detailed document that is either statutory or for whatever reason can't be in-page content, then it's making yourself familiar with the accessibility standards, and you can speak to us, prior to your place in the timeline to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get that sort of sorted so it's not a last minute thing. And then for the sort of more priority services, things that affect call volumes to the customer service centre, and the most popular services on the site, there'll be a more detailed user needs process as well. So the sort of expert user researchers in the project, they'll work with you to come up with user needs, which we can then test against the final content to make sure that it's meeting what people require from it rather than just what the council might need to sort of broadcast. So yeah, if we move on to the next one. And then this is just a little kind of a little note to say that we will support you in the content creation. So that there will be a lot to do in terms of putting that content together, and certainly the best services on the new site in terms of the easiest to work with and the prior to vesting day were the ones that committed a lot of time to it, and came up with really good content that they were then able to speak to us about and feedback and make it a two-way process, and make sure that it was on the site in the best way possible. So as Lucy mentioned, there was a content workshop this morning, which I think a few people who are on this call attended, and that was really good. That Ian from FutureGov ran, really helpful. And I think that's that was recorded, so you'll be able to watch it back. But we'll certainly be taking a lot of the learning from that. Things that some of the stuff, I think I was talking to Sam, who manages the county site, and we things that with a lot of these presentations that you kind of know, but you need to be kind of reminded of every now and then, and sort of it's about embedding that across the organisation. We had some really good feedback from service sort of staff during the presentation along those lines about how they can use it, not just in web content, but when they're designing sort of the way emails are structured, or sort of letters that go out to customers. As I mentioned, document accessibility, so that is a big thing, which hopefully you've been communicated to about already in various ways, but that's because of the legal requirements, that does take up a lot of time. And the more that you can do up front to make any documents that go on the site accessible, the better. Content submission form, and yeah, just to say about document accessibility, we will work with you on that to make sure that you know, you've got everything you need. There is an iLearn course that's like an overview of an accessibility. If you've got specific issues, then we can work with you to resolve those. The content submission form, so that's already kind of working well. So available via the intranet, where services are submitting their content, and comes through to the relevant inbox. Then we go back to services once content's on the site, or if we've got any other questions. That's working really well. And then the style guide finally is basically something we're working on at the moment. So the general approach will be to follow the GDS style guide. So if you're in doubt, that's probably a good place to look at initially. But we're working up something more comprehensive and more Northamptonshire centric, and that will be, yeah, basically the document to follow, to make sure that the content that you're working on for the migration is the best it can be. So yeah, if you've got anything that you're not sure about, then it's best to contact us, and we can kind of talk you through it. And I think that might be it for me. Let's have a look, see if there's anything else. No. So yeah, we're happy to kind of communicate with you about it. But hopefully that gives you a good overview of what to expect in the timeline to come. And I'm going to hand over to Panos.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Hello from me. I'm just here to talk about the Lean Team experiment that we had. As a reminder for the people who may have forgotten, or the people who weren't here before, the Lean Team experiment is well, an experiment we decided to do with a much smaller team of people. It was a 4-week-long experiment, and over the next few slides, I'm going to go over, we are going to go over, maybe I should say with Lucy, over what we have done so far, what we have learned, what we'll do next, and what the future holds. So the slide that Lucy's showing you right now is our beautiful faces. This is who we are. The point of having this experiment was, of course, to focus on human-centered design a little bit, but it was also to test out the size of the team, like a smaller team as well, whether or not it would be easier to communicate with each other. Spoiler alert, it was. And also to have a clearer focus on a specific topic. In this case, that topic was the directories. Initially, we were given the brief of please build us directories functionality, and that was it. And as you can see, it's much more of a solution-based approach rather than focusing on what the problem is. So we decided to reframe this into what you can see there that says, how might we best structure and present non-narrative information for residents that is also easy for the team to maintain? So both how it's structured and also how it's presented. This was reframed, let's say, during the kickoff, and that's where we based the next 4 weeks on. And with that, I'd like to pass it on to Lucy, who's going to go over the double diamond.
Thanks, Panos. Yeah, so what Panos has just referred to there as the double diamond is now what you're looking at on the screen. So just to remind you kind of what the double diamond is, I think we kind of referred to it in the last show and tell, but it essentially aims to rationalize, the process and how we work and kind of provide a model to work through a user-centered design process. So we'll kind of roughly follow this, and really the main takeaway from it is the idea of the diamonds, or the kind of squares. You can see the blue squares, how they open up and then narrow down. So we're working in sort of 1 week time blocks, and you can see it's across from 1 week to 4 weeks. So you can see our little "we are here" arrow. So we're currently we've just started the design week. So we've passed discover, we've passed define. And you can see the blue box, how it opens up to discover. So obviously we're kind of like opening up our ideas and thinking of different things, thinking of what's currently there. And then the define stage is where what we've gathered, we've kind of reviewed that and tried to make sense of all of the information, and then essentially kind of close down on our scope to make sure that we're only focusing on certain things, rather than the scope being absolutely massive and not being able to kind of control what we're looking at. And then in the design and deliver phases later on, which will kind of talk to you a little bit about what's happening next, we'll obviously start to open that up with the designs and almost like prototyping, kind of going out wide there, and then coming back down into the deliver stage, where we narrow down again on like, this is our final product. I guess this is what we've delivered in the 4 weeks. So just to give you a bit of an overview on what we've completed in our discovery phase, we've kind of split the next 2 slides up into like what our aims and goals were before we completed the phase, what the outcomes of that phase was, and then kind of like some of the lessons learned. So some of the aims or goals of the week were to do or complete some desk research. So by that we mean looking at things like usage analytics, of the existing sovereign council non-narrative information. So I know Panos mentioned that initial kind of plan of looking at directories, and then we changed it to looking at the non-narrative information. So that's what we did there. We looked at some analytics, web analytics on that information. We also looked at some competitor and comparator analysis. So competitor being, other councils that might have similar information, maybe they've laid it out similarly, and then comparator analysis of other services that are using and displaying that same structured informational data, but not necessarily councils. We also looked at creating hypotheses based on the perceived and user and business needs. So kind of like making out, I guess, kind of statements of what we assume or what we think the user needs, and then we'll be able to kind of test those hypotheses as we go on into the the defined stage, design, and then deliver at the end. So some of the outcomes of our discovery phase, there were quite a lot of common themes across some of the outcomes, not expecting you to be able to read those post-it notes in that image there, but we kind of collated some of our findings and realized that there were some common themes about how the data had been structured in some of these existing council sites. We kind of looked at how the content or the data was actually structured, and then we also looked at how the content had been presented. So for example, if we're talking about something like car parks, there was often times where the car parks would be displayed in like a map format. You can kind of see on the left hand side there what I'm kind of referring to. You can see maps, and then they've kind of pinpointed where the car parks are available in the town. And then, yeah, as mentioned, as in one of our aims and goals, we created hypotheses. So we started to form those, and then we looked to kind of, I guess, develop those in our define stage. So moving on to the lessons learned on this slide, these are actually 2 lessons learned from myself. So kind of speaking on my part, really, not like the whole team, but I found from the first phase, obviously knowing that we're working in quite short time frames of 1 week per phase, I found that any actions that I was given, it's probably best to do them straight away. I mean, that's a given anyway with any task you're given, is to kind of action it as soon as you receive it. But specifically for the work that we were doing here, with the fact that we only had 1 week to do a specific phase, it just made sense to get it done straight away, before you kind of get like pulled into other pieces of work, or potentially you might get given additional actions on top of that. And then also a double negative, but don't not share a thought. I found we were doing this work in almost like workshop sessions, and I found that in maybe the first workshop session I had some ideas or some thoughts in my head that I was kind of debating whether it's appropriate or whether it's really necessary to mention, but actually it's probably always necessary to kind of raise it and mention it. It might not be useful at this phase, but maybe, you know, if we keep a note or keep a log of these things, it might come useful later on. So yeah, don't not share a thought. Double negative, but very useful to learn there. And then just to kind of cover some of the things that we've learned in the define phase. So obviously, just to go through our aims and goals first. Some of our aims were we wanted to be able to prioritise the topics. So from our initial discovery phase, we obviously found a lot of the existing content or existing information on the Sovereign sites, but we wanted to kind of prioritise the services and pick out maybe 1 or 2 service areas to focus on, or topics to focus on, and then kind of move forward into design with those. We also completed an assumption smash, so looking at some of the things we might think are actual facts, and then perhaps they're actually assumptions, and maybe we need to kind of validate those assumptions somehow. So that's a rough idea of what an assumption smash is. And then we also looked at creating some how might we statements. So they're the statements that we create to kind of allow for, I guess, better designing within the design phase. Some of the outcomes that came out of those aims and goals and like the workshops that we held as a lean team were that the prioritization part of the workshop was, we came out with initially as a council tax was that top result, and then we also chose to go with car parks as well, as like just kind of to diversify really and have 2 different topics rather than just focusing on one. We then started to look at obviously the facts, assumptions, and then trying to see if we can validate any of those assumptions for both of those topics. So just to detail some of the council tax facts there, we know that to display the council tax information or council tax band information, it's a statutory requirement for councils to do that. Each band has a monetary amount, and each property is also then tied to a band and an amount. So that was information we knew were definite facts, but then there were some things that we kind of determined were maybe assumptions, and we needed some validation on those things. So some of the assumptions were people wanted to check other property bands. We don't actually know that for sure, so that's something we'll need to validate. Users want to search by postcode to be able to find, you know, what their council tax band is or what a council tax band is. We also don't know whether that's a true fact yet. Also, users only want to go to the council tax section to complete a specific task. Again, something we need to validate, and we've kind of, I guess, looked at some of those validation methods, like how can we validate some of those assumptions. We could probably do that by sending out a survey, obviously reviewing analytics, and then possibly just reviewing some of the current solutions that we have to see if we can pull anything out from there. And then just to quickly go through some of the facts, assumptions, and then our validation methods for car parks as well. So some of the facts that we know are true for car parks within the Sovereign Council sites. There are a number of car parks in Northamptonshire that are managed by local authorities, and also users want clarity on where to park and for how long. So that one, I guess we were kind of on the fence about a bit about whether that could be an assumption or whether it's a fact, but we kind of determined that was essentially a fact, that users wanted clarity on where to park and for how long, not necessarily from the council site, but just in general. And then some of the assumptions that we know we need to validate from some of the workshops were that users want to use Google to find parking. That might not necessarily be true. Councils want to promote car parks in order to encourage people to come into the town. because car parking isn't necessarily a statutory requirement to publicise on the council sites, perhaps that's the reason. So it's just something that we want to obviously dig a bit deeper and find out if that's the case. And then a user needs to know about accessibility friendly car parking spots. Again, another assumption that we'd like to validate. So there are some obviously ways we can validate those, maybe by speaking to the council car park team directly. We can look to perhaps send a survey out to kind of get some of those answers as well. And also maybe like one-to-one interviews with some users just to kind of understand their experience. And then that second outcome there around the word association. So that was actually a task you can see in the screenshots just below. It was a task that we did at the start and the end of the workshop, where we essentially thought of words associated with the term car park and then thought of words associated with the term directory. And when you kind of put those two together, you could literally see no correlation between the two. Like the words were completely different. You know, we would associate car parks, maybe the word stressful would come about, possibly something to do with the, you know, how safe the car park is. Whereas with directory, you think of things like list, or I think some words came out about possibly them being boring, maybe boring to look at, boring to interact with. So that was quite an interesting outcome and just quite a fun activity to kind of see if there was any correlation. And then just to go with some of the lessons learned, these were actually 2 lessons learned from Panos, so hopefully I explained these correctly. Just kind of, I guess, when it comes to putting together the workshops and maybe working with different people, you have to kind of learn to be adaptable and to kind of go with the flow. Sometimes obviously the way you see something going isn't necessarily how other people see it, so you kind of have to adapt to and I guess compromise as well to come to a better agreement on something. And then also one of the lessons learned, or maybe one of Panos's highlights, was around completing the assumption smash. So the screenshot below is actually what, you know, one of our outcomes of completing the assumption smash for car parks. And it was just something that Panos in the past hadn't done actually physically or kind of in practice. It was more of just a theoretical thing that he would kind of do in his head. So it's quite good to lay everything out and see these are the facts and then these are the assumptions, and then kind of understanding what needs validating, where are our knowledge gaps, etc. So hopefully those 2 slides make sense, and I'm going to pass back over to Panos.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. And yeah, you did explain those perfectly, so thanks. Well, the next steps, I guess, for the Lean team, we've only got less than 2 weeks left at the moment, so a bit scary, but also very, very exciting. So over the next 2 weeks, what we want to do is to refine this. Over the next week, I should say, what we want to do is to refine the scope a little bit. What do we actually want to build in the end? And I'm kind of cheating a little bit here because we're already in the process of going over this 3rd week, so I can, you know, speak from what we already done. But that is what we're planning to do anyway. We also want to do some scoping around the design. We want to help our designers Lawrence and Chris with some ideas or some direction on where to work on. We also want to get an understanding a little bit of the technical feasibility of everything. So what functionality would we want to include in this prototype? That's obviously going to be very helpful for the developers on the team, namely Hannah and Anthony. So that's what we want to do over the next week, let's say, maybe less than a week. And as you can see, we already started working on that. There's a few wireframes, I should say, or wireframes around ideas of how council tax might work. And then in the final week, we want to actually deliver something. We want to start creating a working prototype of something. So build the thing, essentially, is the goal of that week. And we also want to finalize the definition or the definitions of what we mean by directory. And what I mean by that is going to become a little bit clearer on the next slide. But what we have done at the moment is we have taken a few of the attributes, I guess, that we have associated with directories or non-narrative content, let's say. And we have made some umbrellas, and we want to refine those a little bit so that they can actually be helpful for future solutions as well. So moving on to the next slide. Excuse the GIF. That was an idea that Lucy and I had. I think it's really cool. But anyway, So what does the future hold for this lean team, let's say, or our learnings as a lean team? Well, the first one, and I think the probably the most practical one, is the ability to reuse this functionality for other services that have non-narrative information. So as I mentioned earlier, we're putting together this Venn diagram of different umbrellas of type of content. So you can see on your screen some of the some of them are unstructured content, others are structured around event-based, location-based. There's obviously overlap as well. So it's still a work in progress, but I think it's going to be very interesting when we have that nailed down. It's also something that we can use in what David was talking about before in the content work stream, in the move and improve work or scheme, or however you want to call it. And also a little bit more abstract, but equally as important, as I say, we've all done now a small introduction on how to use human-centered design. And it's a great start in understanding how to use that as a team, but not only as a team. We also need to pass that knowledge on to the rest of the people in both councils and other councils, if they're here watching us at the moment. We also want to carry forward to the future the benefits of working in a small team. As I mentioned earlier, scaling it down usually helps things move faster. You know, big things, you see it in movies as well, they move like really, really slowly. And the phrase "too many cooks" also comes to mind when talking about that. So having a smaller team, better channels of communication, more, dare I say, agile team, although that's another concept, does work really, really well. And that's something we want to keep using moving forwards. And the last thing I want to leave you with is being comfortable with being uncomfortable, or being comfortable with ambiguity, and actually embracing ambiguity, because we don't always know what we're doing, but that's absolutely fine. Because that's the whole point of human-centered design. We start from something abstract. And as Lucy mentioned before, the double diamond, we go wide, then we narrow, we go wide, and we narrow again. So the place of ambiguity is actually where the magic happens, I would say. So yeah, that was pretty much it from the whole lean team experiment. And with that, I would like to pass it on to Anthony, who's going to talk about the development learnings.
It's actually going to be Josie doing the development learnings.
Apologies, Josie.
No, not at all. Just in case people mistake me for Anthony, I thought I'd just better clear that up. So yeah, development learnings with the team. So FutureGov and Decent are coming to the end of their involvement on the project. So we're beginning to work out how we transfer from the current project to more of a BAU approach. So we are currently onboarding West Northamptonshire developers to take over the development and deployment of changes to both of the Unitary websites. So just a couple of things that I'm going to take you through about our onboarding and how it's been going, what training needs, kind of what don't we know, and then what we're going to be doing, kind of supporting that content migration that David took us through earlier. So there is a lot to learn, both background knowledge and also just picking up different tools that we haven't used before. So in our retro this sprint, we focused on the onboarding process and how that's been going and what our confidence levels are at. So from that, we highlighted some training needs, which we're working currently very closely with the developers from FutureGov and Decent to go through the areas that require sort of some more support and guidance on. We're also going to use this as providing a baseline of understanding for when we need to then onboard any new developers in the project in the future, so that we can kind of have a very clear definition and an approach to how we get people up to speed with the huge amount of work that has gone on to get us to this stage so far. With regards to how we're going to support the content migration work, we're currently looking at drafting up a process that will fit in with the content timeline to provide the development support when it is required. So once the draft version has been produced, this will be shared obviously with the team to scrutinise, and then we'll share it out with the wider team. But the idea of this is to help us manage our normal everyday workload alongside kind of the commitments to this team to make sure that we can provide that development resource when it's required, off the back of the content work that is being identified. So one of the areas highlighted in our training needs was to understand how everything fitted together with the front end and back end of the websites. So if you go to the next slide for me, please, Lucy, you'll see our development blueprint. So this was something that we produced in a workshop yesterday. So it is very much a work in progress. But the idea obviously is to help us understand what tools are used for what. Like I said, there's a number of tools that we haven't used before, or we haven't used in this particular fashion before. So it's kind of understanding the front end, the back end, how the tools are used and what for. Out of that workshop, it helped us to identify some updates to documentation that kind of, as a new fresh pair of eyes looking at something, some further detail would help. So we're updating our SAD document, which is our Solutions Architect Definition document, so that we've got this central place to understand the summary and the tools and the technologies that are used across the websites. So our next steps really is now we're starting to kind of get that better understanding and picture of how everything fits together on paper. It's actually to start making changes, hopefully leading the changes, and then we have got the support obviously of the FutureGov and decent developers over the next month or so to support us while we're going through and making those changes so that we can feel slightly more confident in the way that we're building them and making sure that we continue with the good work that has already been done so far. So that's a very brief update of our development team and some of the lessons that we're learning and continuing to learn over the next month or so until we start having that step back from the FutureGov and decent developers and it being with our West Northants developers. So I think the next bit that we're going to is the audience activity, which I think Fiona is leading. So I'll hand over to Fiona.
Hi everyone, we're going to be moving on to an audience activity now. So if you want to go to the next slide for me, Lucy. So essentially we're going back to what we were talking about earlier that David was going through in regards to the content migration. So we want to get your thoughts and considerations for our next audience activity, which we'll be doing on Menti. If you go to the next slide. So what you can do is you can either get your phone out and take a picture of the QR code to sign up, or if somebody could pop the link and the code in the chat, or you can just leave it on the screen to be able to get to the session. And essentially, we want you to share your thoughts of potential challenges that you might think that may arise for your service regarding content migration. So spend a few minutes having a think about what you think may happen or issues that may arise ahead of putting on content for the new sites and new unitaries. Lucy, you're able to copy that link into the chat just so that it's easier for people to click onto the link?
I can indeed.
Perfect, thank you.
I just tried, Lucy, but it's it didn't copy through with the link. Sorry, everyone.
Oh yes, I can see that now. It is lost that. Perfect, thank you, Panos. And we'll give it a couple of minutes for people to kind of log in and see what everyone's thinking. So we've got our first one through. Services asking for too many pages, too much useless content. Thousands of old inaccessible documents. Policies and the way the sovereign departments work not being unified. getting some great comments through. 4 so far. If we can get some more people involved, that would be great. Not happening quickly enough. Connolly, do the answers come up next to each other, or is it in a view? Is it in a kind of scrolling view?
It's in scrolling view, so I'll just keep scrolling.
Okay. Another one, services not having merged together behind the scenes. Oh, we've got a question here. How many environments are going to be live at the same time? I'm not really understanding that question. If you could come off mute and explain that a bit further, a member of the team may be able to explain that a bit further. Is that okay? Can't hear anything if you're speaking.
Do you mean how many websites? Could type in the chat if microphone's a problem.
Got another question. Need to put table of data that will be updated. We don't want to recreate data into web table as it's in a database currently. How do we overcome this? Again, if you want to explain a bit further, it's because it's held on a third-party site or just somewhere else and you want to embed it into the website? Is that what you mean? Again, if you want to come off mute to explain your question a bit further, that'd be great. Got another one come through, engaging and getting agreement with senior colleagues for change. Just had this, I am a counsellor user. Am I in the wrong place to suggest ideas? Lots of microsites, can we keep them? Service area still fragmented. The amount of documents that we have. Senior managers not getting on board with GDS approach. If anyone knows what GDS means, that would be great to understand. The acronym.
Government Digital Services.
Thank you, Colin. Time it will take to migrate and affect the customer journey in the meantime. Yeah, that's a great question as well. And that's a part of the human-centric approach that we're going with once content has been looked at and we've reviewed it to test it with user research and with the public. Meeting new accessibility rules. Again, I think there's going to be more content information about how to make documents accessible. More e-forms will be needed. Another question regarding live environments, how many sites live and how to keep content updated? And when you say live sites, do you mean when the content is being migrated over and then what's happened to the existing content? Is that what you mean in that question?
I can chip in on that one. I think the aim would be obviously to only have content in one place. Well, not just aim, that's what will happen. We won't be duplicating anything, so you won't ever have to keep content updated, like the same content updated in 2 different places. We'll be working to obviously switch the relevant sovereign sections off as part of the go live for the new sites.
I wonder if that question was about live UAT site, dev sites, and keeping everything up to date, aligned. It might have been so.
Possibly, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think it should really be affected from a service point of view, but it depends who's asked the question.
Another one, we will need to provide data to the web page from a database. How will we do this?
I think for stuff like that, we'll need to have a bit more detail if you email into the web team address in either the West or North, because it's really dependent on what your content looks like at the moment. So if you already have to do that, how does it work? And if it's new, we'd just have to check why that's a different thing from what's happened previously.
One of the things the team are working on now is looking at the coroner's API, which exists. So in terms of pulling in data from a third-party external site, and I know Kevin and Will and Paul from the development team are looking at how to display this on the Unitree website. So if it's just a matter of how to display content in a table, it's something the team are working on. So like David said, if we have got more details, we'll be able to work with you to create a solution for the new sites. But Fiona, I will circulate these questions with the team after show and tell, and I think Juliet's got a few more things to share with us about what's next.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Lucy, did you want to take over screen sharing? Brill.
Cool. Thanks very much. Okay. So I just a big thank you to colleagues for presenting those really interesting pieces of work they've been carrying out. I think specifically the human-centered design is really good to be going through that practice with FutureGov as the tutors, the teachers for them, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that works when we start to do the service design with each of the different service areas as part of the content approach. But I was just going to tell you a little bit more about sort of what's coming up what's coming up in June and beyond that for the project and for the general websites overall. Well, as I'm sure you've gathered from this this presentation, content roadmap is leading the way. So the main focus of our work in phase 2, and phase 2 is really between vesting day and when we get the 8 sovereign sites decommissioned, and we're left with our 2 new sites for the North and West. So that's the main focus of our work is getting that content off the sites and producing user-centered, optimally designed UDS approach content onto these 2 new sites. As we do that, but there's other bits and pieces that will come into it as we go along. I think I'm skipping ahead here to a bit to roadmap. So roadmap is really about anything that the team are finding out in their discussions with the services that they think might need a piece of development work, for example. Something we're looking obviously at the directories or whatever name they come, whatever the solution comes out of that particular kind of lean team experiment. And there might be other things like that come out of it. And so we'll be working closely with the dev team and also with the transformation teams to kind of build in some of that along the way into that process. We're continuing with the upskilling of the in-house teams, as Josie told you about. I mean, our FutureGov will continue to support us, although the bulk of the work that they've done to support us up to now, they've been with us very closely, quite hand-holding up to this point. So they're starting to pull back now, upskill the teams in-house so that we can carry on with that work. But they aren't leaving us entirely. We still have the opportunity to contact FutureGov and to involve FutureGov in specific pieces of work, and also they will be supporting us for a while yet with the dev skills and handover there, and in content skills too for this work that we're going to be doing with each of the service areas. So transformation teams. So in the North and the West, we have 2 transformation teams, which many of you will probably be aware of, and we'll be continuing to provide governance and support, although we won't be working closely in the project as such, but we will be there sort of supporting and monitoring to make sure the outcomes and the budgets and everything are working to the benefits of the whole organisation going forward. We also want to be communicating our process out in the open, so we need to work through exactly how we're going to best do that in this next phase of the work. So could I have the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So a couple of things that have been going on. We've also been having lunch and learn sessions that Future Gov have been providing for us within the organisation, and we've opened those out so that others are able to actually benefit from that experience. So we've had a couple so far. We've had a service design workshop and a content design workshop this morning, which David referred to. We've got a couple more coming up. We've got one on prototyping on the 3rd of June and another one on machine learning on the 15th of June. So please contact us if you'd like to attend those. They're open to anyone in the organisation who wants to attend. So that's great. And just quickly moving on to the next slide, this is all about communications and sharing our progress. So those of you in the organisation will know that we've had some Sparks pages, which gave you a history of everything that's gone on in the project to date. So if you haven't seen those, it is still live, although the content finishes sort of just after vesting day. You can go back and look at the progress of the project right from the start of our first sprint, developing the work, and you will see also on there all the videos of previous show and tells. There is a YouTube channel that's up and running. It is branded Future Northants at the moment, but we'll be reviewing that. So that again will have all the links to these videos. We have intranet pages in the north and west that will give you information on services, the website service and contact information. And please can I also encourage you all, is particularly if you're involved with creating any content or documents, to go and do the accessibility e-learning on iLearn. As you probably appreciate, having accessible content is going to be a really key thing. It's a legal requirement, something we must do. It's quite a short course. It really hits home with some of the messaging, so highly recommended. And we are looking at new ways of sharing. So we're considering medium blog, a blog for the west, blog for the north, or potentially a joint blog, updating YouTube and other ways. So watch this space, and we'll let you know as soon as possible once we've made decisions on how we're going to do this. So thank you very much. I think it's just really to thank you all for coming and open the floor for any questions. You've got the contact details on this slide if you want to get in contact with us that way. Thanks very much. Any questions? I have a hand up. James Hakewell. Hi, James.
Hello. I had one of those experiences which says I got a link to coming along, and I'm not sure whether I should have got that link, but I've enjoyed what's gone on. I'm a counsellor, obviously.
Well, that's great. I'm pleased to have you.
Well, I thought I've probably done it up. If I have the time, I'll try and learn. I did put into the questions, when and where will councillors have the opportunity to put things forward? And I mean, some of the things you've already talked about, there may be a short answer to that. Some of the things you've already talked about, like car parks and all that sort of thing, is the sort of thing that residents use and I get questioned about. So where will be the right opportunity for me to do that? Another thing, like as a KBC legacy site, the search on KBC planning applications was very poor. You know, you more or less had to give a grid reference to find an application, which not many of us have. So where and when should I get involved? I thought this might be it, but I tend to think, having followed the technology, it might not.
Yeah. So before, so in the Future Northants project before vesting day, we did engage with a couple of the councillor groups. So we got some feedback there. But you're absolutely right, and it's something that we probably need to look at a little bit more how we would do that going forward. So we've got very close links with senior stakeholders, Rebecca Peck and Guy Holloway in the programme. So I think probably the best thing, Richard, would you agree? Richard's our project owner. Best thing is we have a discussion with them about how we best do that with you going forward. Richard, didn't want to add anything?
Yeah, I think it's all to do with the timeline, isn't it? Making sure that when we're on the timeline to move that that content over and improve it, that we engage with stakeholders at that point. So that'll be our plan, James, that we'll definitely include key people along the journey. So yeah, we'll be in touch and we'll give people the opportunity to get involved.
One of the things, just to quickly come back, appreciate you're on time. What 3 words? I don't know how many people know about what 3 words, but I'm a rural councillor and have been since 1987. What 3 words for things like fly tips, situations, road problems and so on, that is an application that when the chance comes, I'll mention. But I very much hope that it was somewhere within the transformation process, because it makes it so much easier to identify rural or other locations where the postcode or any other physical aspect isn't available. But I'm sure you've all heard of it, but at least I've said it. And thank you for answering my questions.
Thanks very much, James. I think definitely something to consider. Well, more than consider, is obviously the way forward, I would think. So, yeah, thanks for raising that.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, and it's something that we're looking at for possible car park directories and location-based items, as well as giving people the what 3 words, so they can navigate to places as well.
This is exactly the kind of thing that we want to hear from people, actually. So really appreciate you coming along to talk about this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I followed about 25% of it.
Come next time, you get the hang of it. Yeah. Great, thank you. Any more questions from anybody? I appreciate obviously it's a big meeting, so you can contact us on these emails, or type in this meeting chat if you've got access to it after the meeting. We'll be very pleased to have a chat with you. Thank you. And thanks to all my colleagues for your presentations too.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.